my husband made a joke that humiliated me in front of everyone on our wedding day. People laughed. I didn't. That's when I started documenting everything, and a year later, I destroyed him in divorce court without ever raising my voice. I remember the exact moment it started, the unraveling. The music was soft, classical, playing over the chatter of wedding guests sipping champagne under the vaulted ceilings of the heritage estate. Strings of white roses hung from the chandeliers, and everything on the surface looked perfect. My dress, a custom off-shoulder silk gown, floated behind me like a cloud. The scent of peonies followed me wherever I walked. It should have been the happiest day of my life. But even before the ink on the marriage license dried, something cracked. It happened during the toast. We were standing side by side, his arm draped loosely around my waist. He held the mic with the other hand, flashing that wide, charming smile everyone seemed to adore. He leaned into it like a seasoned performer, but I could feel how far away he was from me, even as he held me close. "Marrying Lily," he said, voice full of mock sincerity, "is kind of like buying a luxury car, beautiful, expensive, and you always wonder if she'll start screaming when you scratch the paint." The guests erupted in laughter. I didn't. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I remember how it felt, the way that joke sliced clean through the joy. It wasn't just a jab, it was a message. One meant to humiliate me in public while disguising itself in humor. And he knew it. That was his talent. His cruelty never showed up as yelling or fists. It was always draped in silk, wrapped in charm. And when people laughed at my expense, it gave him cover. I stood there frozen, the wineglass trembling slightly in my hand. I scanned the room. My mother was looking down, pretending to adjust her bracelet. My sister gave me a small, awkward shrug. No one said anything. No one ever did. I'm Lily Hartman, and I was 32 when I married Daniel, a corporate attorney with a smile that opened doors and hid knives. I was a marketing director at a luxury skincare company, soft-spoken but ambitious. We met 2 years earlier at a charity gala, and within months he made me feel like I had stepped into the perfect life. Elegant dinners, whispered compliments, long weekends at country estates. But that wedding toast was the first time I saw the mask slip in public. It wasn't the last. After the laughter died down, Daniel leaned close and whispered in my ear, "Don't be so sensitive, babe. You know I love you." His hand squeezed my waist a little too tightly, like a warning. I nodded, smiled for the photos, and toasted back. But inside, something recoiled. Something fragile and sacred took a step back. And I remember thinking, if he could mock me here, on our wedding day, what would he allow himself to do behind closed doors? The rest of the reception passed in a blur of clinking glasses and staged photos. Everyone kept talking about how perfect we looked together. I played the part. I laughed, danced, posed, smiled. But inside, I began storing everything. That joke wasn't just a moment, it was a seed. And by the time it bloomed, the garden around me would be full of thorns. After the wedding, things didn't explode. They decayed. At first, it was small. The way Daniel would dismiss my ideas during dinner conversations with his friends, cutting me off mid-sentence with a condescending, "What Lily means is," and always with a smile, like he was protecting me from embarrassing myself. I started doubting myself. Was I overreacting? We'd be getting ready in the morning, and I'd ask him if I looked okay in an outfit. "You always ask that," he said one day, rolling his eyes. "You're not a teenager. Get some confidence." That one stung more than I expected. I stopped asking. I started watching him more, paying attention. He made jokes at my expense in front of his colleagues, poked fun at my careful planning, and laughed about how intense I was about work. When I pushed back, gently in private, he'd tilt his head like I was a child. "You're too emotional, Lily. Learn to take a joke. Not everything is an attack." But it wasn't just jokes. It was control, quiet and constant. He'd ask me to cancel my weekend yoga class to join him for brunch with his friends. And when I hesitated, he'd sigh, "You'd rather stretch with strangers than be with your husband?" So I'd cancel, over and over. He had a way of making me feel like I owed him my presence, my silence, my obedience. And when I did speak up, he made me feel guilty for ruining the mood. I stopped seeing my friends as often. Texts went unanswered. Invitations politely declined. At work, I smiled, performed, led my team, but something inside me was quietly curling into itself. He wasn't physical. He wasn't even openly cruel. But his words, they chipped away at my sense of reality. My sister, Ava, noticed first. We were having coffee one Sunday, a rare moment alone, when she looked at me for a long time and said, "You used to laugh more. You used to take up space." I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee and changed the subject. The thing is, I didn't even know how I got here. This wasn't the kind of abuse people wrote headlines about. There were no bruises, no shouting matches, no threats, just subtle daily erosion. A campaign of small humiliations. Death by 1,000 eye rolls, sighs, corrections, and jabs masked as love. I started keeping a private journal on my work laptop. Just fragments, phrases he'd said, how they made me feel, days I felt especially hollow. I didn't know why I was documenting it. It just felt like proof. Like I was trying to remind myself that it was real, that I wasn't just too emotional, as he always claimed. One night, a few months before our first anniversary, I was curled up in bed, laptop balanced on my knees, finishing a late report. Daniel walked in and dropped his keys a little too loudly on the table. "You still working?" he asked, peeling off his blazer. "Yes, we have a product launch this week." He snorted. "Of course, because if you don't keep working like a mule, they'll find out you're not as smart as you pretend to be." He didn't even look at me when he said it. That was the moment something snapped, not in rage, but in realization. He didn't respect me, and maybe he never had. But I also saw something else clearly that night. He had underestimated me, just like he always did. That's when I stopped waiting for him to change. That's when I stopped trying to explain myself. That's when I started watching him more carefully, not as a woman in love, but as someone preparing for something inevitable. And while he kept laughing, I quietly began planning. I didn't confront him. That would have been too easy for him. Instead, I smiled more. I started letting him believe he had won. It was safer that way, at least for now. I kept playing the attentive wife, booking our dinner reservations, laughing at his jokes in public, keeping the apartment spotless. But inside I had shifted. Every time he mocked me, every time he dismissed my voice, I filed it away. Not in rage, but in strategy. The night after he called me a mule, I stayed up until 3 a.m. researching high-asset divorce attorneys. I found one in a nearby district who specialized in emotional coercion cases. Her reviews read like war stories. One client wrote, "She didn't just get me out. She made sure he couldn't touch me after." I scheduled a consultation. At the office, I played it calm. I brought a manila folder with carefully labeled tabs. journal entries, transcribed conversations, screenshots of text messages where he belittled me, gaslit me, guilted me. One from our honeymoon read, "You should really learn to smile more. I didn't marry a storm cloud." Another, "You're lucky someone like me wanted you." The attorney looked up after 20 minutes of reading. "You've got more evidence than most women who walk into court with bruises." That sentence sat with me for days. She advised me to wait, build more, let him keep talking, let him dig himself deeper. So I did. I bought a voice recorder, discreet and small, hidden inside a decorative jewelry box on my vanity. I started capturing his words when we were alone. He had no idea. He never paid attention to the details, and it kept coming. On the night of my promotion, something I had worked 2 years for, he came home drunk from a corporate dinner and said, "Guess even broken clocks get lucky once." He collapsed on the couch. I sat across from him, hands calm in my lap, the recorder running inside the jewelry box. I didn't flinch. I became a student of silence. At work, I quietly separated my finances. I opened a second account, rerouted part of my direct deposit, started collecting pay stubs and investment statements in a personal encrypted drive. He never noticed. He thought I was too soft, too naive. And that was his fatal error. But I didn't stop at finances. I began gathering character witnesses quietly. My sister wrote a statement. So did an old coworker of his who had once witnessed him call me dead weight at a holiday party when he thought no one was listening. Another friend who'd watched him pressure me into drinking when I'd said I didn't want to. All the things I had once forgiven, I now documented. I also hired a forensic accountant because Daniel had secrets too. Turns out that high moral ground he loved to stand on wasn't so stable. He'd been stashing money in a side business, funneling bonuses into an LLC he hadn't disclosed to me. The accountant handed me a thick report. "Did you know he bought a boat?" she asked. "No," I said. "I don't even know how to swim." The boat wasn't the point. The lie was. It gave me leverage, power. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not Ava, not even my mother. I needed this to be clean, precise, controlled. And Daniel? He kept mocking me, kept minimizing me. One night, when I told him I had a headache and wasn't in the mood to go out, he looked at me with that same patronizing smirk he wore at our wedding. "You used to be more fun, Lily. I think marriage ruined you." That smile was the last one he ever wore in my presence without consequence, because by then I had everything I needed. Every insult was now ammunition, every dismissal a page in my file, and every laugh at my expense a countdown to the day I'd walk into court and tear off his mask. Not in anger, not with shouting, but with facts, with evidence, with the truth, delivered as calmly as the day he'd whispered his first insult in my ear. The trap wasn't set. It had already closed. The morning of the court hearing, I dressed with the same care I did on our wedding day. Black wool suit, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back in a low chignon, no makeup except for a touch of lipstick. Not red, burgundy, quiet power. He arrived late. Of course he did. Daniel always wanted an entrance. He strolled into the courtroom like it was a casual business meeting, not the end of our marriage. He smirked when he saw me, then gave a small, theatrical wave, as if this whole thing were a joke. But then he saw my lawyer, and the stack of folders she laid on the table beside her. The judge entered, and things moved quickly. Daniel's attorney tried to start with character statements, talking about how harsh the divorce filing had been, how blindsided Daniel felt. That was my cue. I stood. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't just a case of irreconcilable differences. It's a pattern of psychological manipulation that I have carefully documented." Daniel chuckled, loudly. The judge looked up. "Mr. Hartman," she said sharply, "you'll remain silent unless addressed." He leaned back, blinking. I saw his confidence falter, just slightly. My attorney opened the first folder, transcripts of recorded conversations. On the speakers, the courtroom heard Daniel's voice call me emotionally incompetent, mock my fragile ego, and tell me that a man like me has options. You should remember that. Each clip was short, precise, undeniable. Then came the financials. The forensic accountant was called to testify. She walked the court through the unreported LLC, the hidden income, the luxury boat he paid for in cash. When his lawyer tried to object, she calmly pointed to the financial trail. These weren't accidental oversights, they were deliberate. Daniel was no longer smirking, he was sweating. And then the statements, my sister's affidavit, the former coworker, the mutual friend who had heard him ridicule me at a restaurant for ordering dessert because I had already gained enough since the wedding. The judge listened, carefully. Then came the moment I didn't expect to affect me so deeply, when the judge turned to me and asked, "Mrs. Hartman, do you have anything you'd like to say before I make a ruling?" I didn't read from my notes. I looked directly at Daniel, and I spoke. "I loved you," I said. "I believed in the version of you that you let me see for a while. But what you did, what you said, how you chipped away at me piece by piece, it made me doubt myself in ways I'm still trying to recover from. But I kept records because I knew one day this would be the only language you understood. Facts, receipts, consequences." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I turned back to the judge. "That's all." The room was silent. The ruling was swift. The court granted me a significant share of our assets, including access to the LLC. The judge called his actions calculated and deceitful. He was also ordered to pay attorney fees and fined for concealing financial information. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. For the first time in a long time, my lungs filled without tension, without fear, without pretending to be small enough to keep the peace. Outside the courtroom, Daniel followed me. "Lily, wait." I stopped but didn't turn. "I didn't know you'd go that far." I turned then, finally. "You taught me how far was too far," I said softly. "Every time you laughed at me, mocked me, ignored me, you drew the map." He stood there, speechless. I walked away. Each step felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I finally knew I was never crazy, never too emotional. I was exact, I was patient, and I had survived, not through rage, but through clarity. And that, I think, was the one thing he never saw coming. After the ruling, I didn't return home right away. Instead, I checked into a small boutique hotel near the lake for a few nights. The windows were wide, the sheets were white, and for the first time in years, there was silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. I turned off my phone, ordered room service, and slept. It wasn't dramatic. There were no breakdowns, no tears, just release. 2 days later, I returned to my apartment. Daniel had moved out under court order. I entered the living room and was struck by the absence of his chaos. No keys thrown on the table, no scuffed shoes left at the door, just stillness. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. On the nightstand was a photo from our wedding day, the one where he was whispering in my ear, just seconds after that cruel joke. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted to remember what betrayal looked like. I lit a match, held it to the corner of the photo, watched the flame crawl across the image, curling the edges, blackening the perfect smiles. I dropped it into the ceramic sink and let the ashes fall into the drain. It wasn't rage, it wasn't destruction, it was cleansing. Over the next few weeks, I reinvented everything. I sold the apartment and bought a smaller one on the opposite side of the city, near a greenhouse I loved. I redecorated in soft earth tones, terracotta, olive, ivory. No dark wood, no leather chairs, nothing that reminded me of him. I reconnected with my old friends, went to yoga on Sundays, started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd stayed so long. The answer surprised me. It wasn't weakness, it was hope. I had believed so deeply in the promise of us that I ignored the reality of him. But hope without boundaries is a dangerous thing. Now my boundaries were steel. My voice, once quiet, cautious, had returned. Not loud, not angry, just clear. When people asked me what happened to my marriage, I simply said, "It ended when I realized I was no longer in it." That answer was enough. One afternoon, I ran into one of Daniel's friends, someone who had always laughed at his jokes, even the ones aimed at me. He looked awkward, gave a forced smile, then said, "You really surprised all of us. You didn't seem like the type." "The type to what?" I asked, genuinely curious. He paused. "To fight back." I smiled. "I didn't fight," I said. "I just stopped playing dead." And I walked away, because survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, surgical, and sometimes the best revenge isn't vengeance. It's peace. It's rebuilding in silence. It's walking through the fire and emerging not burned, but forged. It's been a year. I barely think about him now, not because I've forgotten, but because I no longer need to remember. My life has expanded in his absence. I laugh again, freely. I read in silence without waiting for the sound of a door slamming. I trust my instincts because I stopped asking for permission to exist. Sometimes, late at night, I walk to the greenhouse by my new apartment. They leave the outdoor lights on for the plants, and the whole place glows like a lantern in the dark. I sit on the bench outside, watching the vines stretch toward the glass, and I think, this is what healing looks like. It doesn't scream, it grows. Daniel never hit me, he never shouted, but he broke things anyway, quietly, methodically. And when I finally stood up, I didn't need to break him back. I just showed the truth. That was enough. People say divorce is ugly, but sometimes it's the most beautiful act of self-respect. I'm not bitter, I'm not angry, I'm not interested in revenge for revenge's sake. What I did wasn't about destroying him, it was about reclaiming me, and that's what he never expected. Not because he didn't know who I was, but because he never bothered to look. If you've ever been quietly dismissed, publicly humiliated, or made to feel small by someone who claimed to love you, know this. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means strategy. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not crazy. They're just waking up.